Good evening, everyone. Continuing with the Tibetan tradition of mental development, actually starting with it. Last time we just went through the brief autobiography of the author, Geshe Nawang Darge. Geshe, as you know, is the title in the Galuks. I don't know what it means in Tibetan, but in the Galuks, it's the title of their great scholars. So in the Kagyu and the Nyingma and the Sakya, we use the term Kempo, sort of the equivalent. The ones who uphold the scriptural traditions and teach the lamas, basically. But I wanted to start with this statement just to always be keeping in mind, what we're doing and why. So this is from the introduction to this book by D.T. Suzuki, who was the man, really, who brought Zen Buddhism to the country. But in the truth, he was a practitioner of Pure Land Buddhism. And he gave a series of lectures. I don't know if he gave these, but he gave a series of lectures at Columbia in the early 1950s. And these are lectures he gave somewhere too. I don't know if these were also Columbia, but nonetheless, this book is a collection of just the teachings that he gave on Pure Land Buddhism, the Sutric Pure Land Buddhism. And there's an introduction to this collection by Taitetsa Uno, who was a professor, I think at Smith College in Western Massachusetts, was a Pure Land scholar and practitioner, and has passed away just within the last 10 years. So this is from that. As long as our thoughts, feelings, and intuitions come from a limited, finite, and karma-bound being, they are all delusions. It is not a matter of right or wrong, good or bad. This is our naked reality. They are delusions because they make us see the world from a deeply self-centered perspective, and this fact eludes our normal conscious awareness. Our myopic vision distorts reality. Hence, our thinking, doing, and saying are invariably flawed and defective, even though we may not admit it. Religiously speaking, delusions arise from the darkness of ignorance, avidya in Sanskrit, producing insatiable greed, trishna, and manifesting as blind passions, klesha. This is the cause of endless pain and suffering, dukkha. The 19th century thinker Friedrich Nietzsche raised such an understanding to a philosophical level and characterized it as perspectivism. From this vantage point, he undertook a sweeping critique of existing moral values, religious teachings, and philosophical concepts as being without any objective foundation. In his work, The Will to Power, he identifies the source of our delusions and their expression in language as follows. So this is Nietzsche. Subject, object, attribute. These distinctions are fabricated and are now imposed as a schematism upon all the apparent facts, subject, object, attribute. The fundamental false observation is that I believe it is I who do something, I who suffer something, I who have something, I who has a quality. That's the end of the quote. Now back to Taitetsa Uno. Based on this fundamental error, we construct a world with words and concepts infused with our emotions. Our life then becomes filled with polarities, such as good and bad, like and dislike, love and hate, black and white, mine and not mine, enlightened and not enlightened, ad infinitum. Such is the world of 84,000 delusions. We are made to acknowledge this life of fabrication when our reality is illuminated by light. This light focuses on each of the 84,000 delusions, making them transparent and powerless. Light is symbolic of wisdom in Buddhism, and this light is none other than the Buddha of infinite light, Amitabha. Since the light is not harsh, cold, and distant, but soft, warm, and proximate, It is felt as a compassionate working. Thus, the same Buddha is also called the Buddha of infinite life, Amitayus. In East Asia, the two are unified into a single name, Amida Buddha, and brought to life through chanting his name called the Nembutsu, the uttering of Namu Amida Butsu. When we are made to see our delusions by virtue of compassionate light, we have been touched by reality. No longer are we lost or confused, afraid or angry, insecure or fearful, not because these states have vanished, but because they are revealed to us more clearly, securely cradled within the great compassion of the Buddha of infinite light. Each repetition of his name liberates us from our delusions, even as we remain karmically bound to them. This liberation, inconceivable, unexpected, and undeserved, is the cause for the endless celebration of this precious life. 84,000 joys abounding. Yeah, I think that's very well stated. He was a wonderful teacher, though I never met him. I read several of his books. Can certainly recommend them. Taitetsu Uno. And I read that because the greatness of Tibetan Buddhism is the unbelievable proliferation of methods, practices, teachings. I mean, it's just, like they say, 84,000 different teachings. And sometimes it's possible when we discuss these things too to get kind of lost. You lose the forest for the trees, or the trees for the forest. I don't know which way that works. So I wanted to point that out in the beginning because it said there are the great way of path to enlightenment is a path of study and practice. And the practice, the core of the practice is meditation. But there are actually two ways of coming to enlightenment without meditation. One is the tantric method of Boa, where the mind is transferred to Buddha Amitabha's Pure Land at death. But there's a visualization, a technique that's done to do that. But the other, in the sutric form, is the long prayer to be reborn in Buddha Amitabha's Pure Land. Just simple faith can take you there. But nonetheless, the Tibetan tradition of mental development is going into then all these detailed methods in the detailed gradual path. So we're going to read the first chapter of that, which is the 12 principal deeds of the Buddha. And this is interesting to me too, because it starts off in the beginning, this very kind of detailed, scholarly, almost like a outline of the Buddhist path. Starts with this very devotional, faith-inducing, and transcendent kind of story. Okay, 12 principal deeds of the Buddha. As you receive these teachings, you should have the motivation to use them as the means of attaining full enlightenment in order to be of benefit to all living beings. If you lack this motivation, try to develop it. In the course of his spiritual growth, Buddha first developed bodhicitta, the wish to attain enlightenment for the welfare of all sentient beings. Then, for innumerable lifetimes, during 3 limitless world ages, he followed the way of a bodhisattva, a life of giving. By thus eliminating all his obstacles to the attainment of enlightenment, and by perfecting all positive qualities, such as wisdom, compassion, patience, and so forth, he attained the full enlightenment of Buddhahood. Previous to his life as the Indian prince Shakyamuni, Buddha lived and taught Dharma in the Tushita Buddha field. So this is a heavenly realm in the realm of desire. So again, we talk about the 3 realms of samsaric existence. The first is called the realm of desire, kama, dhatu. Kama, not karma, but kama, kama dhatu. Kama is desire. And beings, this includes human beings, beings in this level of understanding, you might say, are marked by desire and attachment. That's what all of us are doing all the time, living with desire and attachment. The next level up is called the rupa dhatu, the form realm. These are beings who have purified themselves of desire, but are still attached to form. So it's very subtle, you might say divine kind of states. Then above that, the third realm is the rupya dhatu, formless realm. And here the beings have no form, have no desire, but they haven't attained enlightenment yet. So this is the highest state of samsaric existence, which the Buddha attained under his second teacher after he left home. And it was being dissatisfied with that he set out, no teachers teaching beyond that in India at the time, that he set out on his great first ascetic quest, and then eventually under the Bo tree for attainment. All right. Yeah, so previous to his life is the Indian prince Shakyamuni. Buddha lived and taught Dharma in the Tushita Buddha field. While he was abiding there, all the Buddhas of the 10 directions urged him that the time had come for the deeds of a supreme Nirmanakaya, that is the physical manifestation of a Buddha, to be enacted in this world of Jambudvipa, the southern continent. Buddha then placed his jeweled crown on the head of Maitreya, appointing him successor as the host of Tushita. So it said that Maitreya is the next Nirmanakaya Buddha that will come, in the calculations differ. Some say 5, some say 50,000 years. Before entering this world, the Buddha made 5 observations concerning the time, place, caste, lineage, and mother to whom he would be born. He saw that it was a time of great strife in Jambudvipa, which is also this ancient name for India, and thus a fit occasion for a Buddha to manifest himself and act there. Buddhas manifest themselves as teachers solely for the sake of those who are able to be led spiritually. Among the 2 kinds of beings who are able to practice Dharma, men and devas, it's divine beings. Interesting, the linguistics of all this. So you hear about a diva, right? Like a singer who is very temperamental and, that kind of characterization. Yeah, it comes from deva, acting in a, lower but divine kind of manner. The former men human beings are unable to go to the deva realms, but the devas can descend to our realm in order to listen to Dharma. Thus, the acts of a supreme Nirmanakaya are always performed among humans. Other realms or continents in which human beings lived are so bountifully filled with pleasures that the faculties of those beings living there are dull, because you don't have to be very sharp to get what you're after. This dullness makes it very difficult for them to develop strong renunciation. Because of the people of Jambudvipa have extremely sharp faculties, that's us, enabling them to develop renunciation with ease, and because many of them are suitable vessels for Dharma, Shakyamuni saw that the deeds of a Buddha should be shown there. At that time in India, there were 4 major castes: the caste of royalty, the Brahmin caste, the merchant caste, and the caste of the common people. Whenever Buddhas manifest themselves in their supreme Nirmanakaya form, they always take birth in one of the 2 higher castes, depending on which is the more highly honored at the time. At that time, the royal caste was more highly revered. Shakyamuni saw that he should take birth in the royal Shakya clan, since the Shakya king was a great ruler who was devotedly served by his many subjects. Furthermore, both the king and queen were of lineages that had been pure for the previous 7 generations. Finally, he saw that it was fitting for him to be born from the womb of Queen Maya Devi, who in a previous life had prayed to be the mother of a Buddha. Following this, Queen Maya Devi dreamt that a 6-tusked white elephant entered her womb through her right side at midnight. Upon her inquiring about this to the Brahmin soothsayers, they prophesied that she had conceived a son who would become a great universal emperor if he followed the life of a householder. But if he instead were to follow the life of a wandering monk, he would become a perfected one, a Buddha. One day, as the time of the child's birth was approaching, the queen took a stroll in the garden grove in Lumbini. Reaching up with her right arm, she grasped a branch of the royal priksha tree, and as she looked to the sky, the sun emerged from her right side. The sky was suddenly filled with a magnificent array of offerings by the devas. Brahmins approached the child with offerings of exquisite muslin, but he arose and exclaimed, "Release me." Then taking 7 steps to the east, he declared, "I shall attain the greatest of all dharmas." Taking 7 steps to the south, he said, "I shall become the object of veneration of devas and men." With 7 steps to the west, he uttered the words, "I am supreme in the world. This is my final birth. I shall cast off birth, old age, sickness, and death." And finally, taking 7 steps to the north, he said, "I shall be the unsurpassable one amongst all sentient beings." Then as he gazed down, he declared, "I shall subdue the gathering of Maras. I shall let fall the rain of Dharma, which will extinguish the fire of suffering of all sentient beings in the hells." And looking to the sky, he said, "All sentient beings will look aloft." 7 days after his birth, the queen, who was a human emanation of Avalokiteshvara, the collected form of the compassion of all the Buddhas, passed away, and her body was carried to the Deva realms. As the boy grew up, his father gave him the finest of tutors, but the prince was well versed in all fields of learning, such as language, mathematics, logic, and medicine, without even having to be taught. When the prince grew into adolescence, the king advised him that it was time for him to take a wife and that a suitable consort should be sought. 500 or more daughters were offered by their parents, and the king ordered his son to choose from among them. Although the prince was perfectly aware of all the faults of desire, he also knew that the bodhisattvas of the past had been able to provide for their wives and children without letting this hinder their spiritual practice. With this in mind, he wrote a description of the kind of woman he would accept as his wife and presented this to his father. The king's ministers then scoured the countryside in search of a young woman possessing the necessary qualities. Finally, they came upon the princess Gopi Yashodhara, and seeing that she fitted the prince's description, invited her and many other maidens to the palace. On their arrival, the prince gave each of them a gift. But by the time Gopi came forward, there were no more gifts left. He then took a precious ring from his own hand and presented it to her, and the king saw that he favored her over the rest. A messenger was then sent to Gopi's father with the request that he give his daughter in marriage to the prince. But he replied that he would only give her to the suitor who was most skilled in athletics. And this news disheartened the king, for he knew that his son was not practiced in such skills. However, when the prince heard of the proposal, he readily agreed to compete with all contestants. After 7 days, 500 youths from all over the king's realm assembled and competed with one another at swordsmanship, archery, wrestling, swimming, foot racing, and other trials of strength and dexterity. In each of these competitions, the prince easily defeated all his rivals. Upon their conclusion, he was given Gopi for his bride, and she became his foremost queen. And so they lived as man and wife for several years. Then one day, by the power of all the Buddhas of the 10 directions, the Bodhisattva prince heard a voice speaking through the notes of music played by his queens. The voice called him. The 3 realms of the world are aflame with the suffering of old age and death. Protectorless, living creatures remain unaware that this blazing fire of death arises from cyclic existence, and they live like bees circling about inside a vase. The 3 realms are transient, like the clouds of autumn. The birth and death of sentient beings is like gazing upon a dance. Like a flash of lightning is the passing of the life of sentient beings, running swiftly like a splashing stream down a steep mountain. Hearing these words, Prince's thought turned to enlightenment. That night the king dreamt that the prince had taken to the wandering life, so he ordered guards to observe him and more pleasures to be offered to him. Not long thereafter, the prince felt the urge to explore the world beyond the palace walls. Ordering his charioteer to make ready his carriage, he left the palace through the eastern gate. They had not gone far before he saw the suffering of old age, which previously had been hidden from him. Inquiring about this to his driver, he was told that the misery was the fate of all those who advance in years, and they returned to the palace. The next time the prince ventured outside the palace, he left by the southern gate, saw a man ravaged by a terrible disease. He set out the third time through the western gate and observed a corpse for the first time. When his driver told him that this was the deserted body of a formerly living person who was now forever separated from his loved ones, the prince determined to find a means of liberation from these miseries. Once again, the prince left the palace, this time by the northern gate, and he saw a bhikshu, a monk, walking along peacefully, his mind subdued. Asking his driver who this man was, he was told that he was one who had abandoned worldly desires, subdued his mind, and in order to attain peace, had become a monk. Seeing that this path was of benefit both to oneself and others, the prince resolved that he would do likewise. But when the king learned of this, he ordered that the walls and the gates of the palace be heavily guarded, and that the wives of the prince increase their efforts to amuse him. But the prince, far from finding them seductive, felt as if he were in a cemetery while he gazed upon their sleeping bodies. With the aid of the devas, he made his secret nocturnal escape. His escape accomplished, the prince saw that his clothes were not fitting for the new life he had chosen. And as he was thinking thus, a hunter appeared and offered him his saffron-colored garments. The bodhisattva then sought out a great spiritual teacher and quickly mastered his teachings. He then went to another guru who had many disciples and quickly attained his level of insight. But still the bodhisattva was not satisfied, for he had not attained freedom from the misery, the cycle, birth and death. For some time he practiced religious austerities with a group of ascetics, but thinking it better to live in solitude, he departed. 5 of his disciples followed him, and for 6 years they practiced meditation, severe ascetic practices, kept silence, and survived on just 1 sesame seed, 1 jujube seed, and 1 grain of rice each day. But after these 6 years of practice, the bodhisattva saw that this alone was not a means for attaining liberation, and he told his disciples that he would once again eat coarse food. They immediately lost faith in him and departed for Varanasi. Shortly thereafter, a girl mixed rice and fresh grain with cream, cooked it, and offered it in a golden vessel to the bodhisattva. He accepted it, and after eating it, his body was greatly revived. A village youth then brought him a bundle of kusha grass to use for his mat. Taking this, he walked to the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya, circumambulated it 3 times, and laid down the stalks of the fresh green grass with their tips meeting in the center. He then sat upon them facing the east and vowed, "Even if my body dries up and my skin, bones, and flesh fall away, I shall not move from this seat until I have reached enlightenment." And he entered deep meditation. Countless Maras came and assaulted him with rains of weapons, but he paid no heed. Then the weapons instead turned to flowers, lovely palaces, and other offerings. But thus subduing all the Maras with the power of his meditation on compassion, he attained the omniscient state of full enlightenment. His body in full meditation posture rose into the sky to a height of 7 palm trees, and countless Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and Devas rejoiced, casting flowers and richly adorning the Bodhi tree with jewels. For 7 weeks, the Buddha examined the state of sentient beings. During the first week, Devas came and made offerings to him. During the second, he traveled to the countless realms of the universe. In the third week, he spoke the words, "Here I have come to the end of suffering," as he sat gazing fixedly on the Bodhi tree. During the fourth, he traveled as far as the oceans of the east and west, and during the fifth, he went to the domain of the Nagas. During the 6th week, he sat at the foot of a Nyagroda tree and ripened many spirit beings. During the 7th week, he went to a grove of datura trees and was offered food by 2 merchants. Then he remained in the forest and pondered the sublime eternal Dharma, transcending all words, which had dawned upon his mind like a clear light. Thinking that no one else would be able to comprehend this Dharma, he decided to remain silently in the forest. But when many bodhisattvas and other divine beings came and requested him to turn the wheel of Dharma, he assented and went to Varanasi. In Varanasi, Buddha taught the 4 noble truths to the 5 disciples who had left him, as well as to many other followers. Thus commenced his first turning of the wheel of Dharma. In other places, he taught Vinaya, or moral discipline, and the practice of close mindfulness, teachings which are also included in the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, and his fame spread. When he was 41 years of age, Buddha Shakyamuni went to the Deva realms to repay the kindness of his mother by teaching her Dharma. During his 57th year, he defeated 6 well-known non-Buddhist teachers in a test of miraculous powers. On Vulture's Peak, he turned the second wheel of Dharma for the countless bodhisattvas and taught the perfection of wisdom. In other places, he gave other teachings, such as those of the Samdi Nirmochanaraja Sutra, which are included in the second turning of the wheel of Dharma. At Vaishali, Buddha turned the final wheel of Dharma, explaining the teaching he had given earlier. He also taught Kalachakra. Many other places in Jambudvipa, he also gave numerous teachings on Tantra. Thus, he brought many beings to full enlightenment. In his 81st year, Buddha told his followers that he was about to pass into nirvana, parinirvana. Shortly before his passing away, there was a non-Buddhist aged 120 years who thrice asked Ananda to allow him to meet Buddha. But each time he was refused. Knowing this, the Buddha called to him, and after speaking with him at length, this non-Buddhist attained arhatship. Shortly thereafter, Buddha Shakyamuni lay down at the foot of a tree in Kushinagar, his head pointing to the north, and entered parinirvana. Relics from his ashes are contained in stupas throughout Asia. Okay, those are the 12 principal deeds of the Buddha. Within there, the 12 are all listed, and you see them pop up from time to time. Now, many details of that story are, further elucidated, of course. Really, the bare bones of it. And I think it's important to keep that all in mind because it's such a wonderful story. I just keep thinking stories are so powerful. And with the storytelling ability like Hollywood has, wouldn't it be great if they would really do a movie like this, but, based on the actual text and the story. Certainly has mythological elements in it, but there's nothing wrong with that. The story itself is so wonderful and so kind of pure, but they just have a hard time doing it. It's like they have to they have to goof it up, trying to make it better, which is pretty good. Yeah, they have parts that were not bad. Yeah, yeah. Siddhartha is like that too. It's there's some wonderful things there, and then it just sort of goes off in different directions. But can't be helped. You got some creative writer like Hermann Hesse. Writing didn't really have much exposure to any of this stuff, and yeah, yeah, right, right, right. So there's all of that. I haven't seen those movies for a long time. We should view them again. Yeah, yeah. But at any rate, the story itself is quite wonderful, and it's also helpful because it's alluded to. You'll see it in a sadhana. They'll mention something, and when you know the story, you know where it fits in. They just almost completely skipped over his whole teaching career, which again went from like age 29 until 81. Um, all sorts of things there. The Pali sutras. So we don't actually know what language the Buddha spoke. They think it's something called Prakrit, which I think means um, the speech of the people. Um, it's said that this language, Pali, which is the language with which some of the old sutras are in, and is the main liturgical language of Southeast Asia. Burma, um, Thailand, um, Cambodia for sure, was later. And then, because the Buddha sutras were not written down for 200 years. And then with the rise of the Mahayana uses Sanskrit, which again, they're very similar. So, for instance, the word for karma in Sanskrit is kama in Pali. Pali is a little bit softer. The consonants are not as hard. Um, but there's very little, when you see the word in one, you recognize it in the other. Um, Dhamma, yeah, Dhamma as opposed to Dharma. Um, Other differences. I don't know either language. But the Sanskrit is always interesting to me because both of them are Indo-European languages, of course, which means we have Indo-European words in English and certainly in the Romance languages. So, for instance, when I read from Taititsa Uno talking about the fundamental ignorance is avidya, so that is like a cappella or atheistic or agnostic. That prefix means without. In vidya, video. So ignorance is not seeing. And I think that's so wonderful. The language is so sort of supportive of like a proper understanding of these concepts in that. Because when we hear ignorance, I don't know if I'm right about this, but I kind of think like I don't know, maybe a kind of a Protestant culture. It's kind of a slur, you're ignorant, meaning you're stupid. But that's not right. And I can't speak for the word ignorance, but in the Buddhist meaning, avidya, there's no kind of like moral stain on that. It's just a fact, the way it is. You just don't, I didn't see. I didn't see. And so immediately there, you feel the compassion of the Buddha. Because although there's not this moralistic judgment and condemnation of beings, at the same time, there's a complete understanding of sort of what they're missing. And therefore, because they've been your mother in a previous lifetime, it's like you have complete understanding and this natural kind of wanting to help, unaffected, unfabricated. And that's something that's kind of hard for us with our sort of individualism and our attachment to self. Thinking that, I mean, we talk about all these things, my truth. And I'm just thinking, wow, is truth something that you possess? Would you please share some with me? You by immediately creating that alienation, my truth, you know, the problem's there and you can't get away from it until you give up that idea. So, but these things are deeply, habitual. And it's like Taitetsu Uno said, we don't see that we live in a state of ignorance. We don't see it. Or even when we start to see it, it's like we don't want to admit it. And yet the recognition of that is the path, this path of wisdom, this path of light. Because when your shortcomings are fully illuminated, then you don't have to hide them anymore or hide the recognition of them. You don't have to pretend to be something other than what you are. And in seeing what you are, to the deeper and deeper as it goes, you see what other people are. And of course, that one-to-one understanding, that is compassion. But again, unfabricated. It's not like picking up some sort of attitude we're supposed to have. but it's this understanding of it and the generation of it again and again and again until it actually dawns. Okay, so that's the first chapter in the Tibetan tradition of mental development. I love the way that he does that 12 principal deeds of the Buddha. And it'll make a little more sense when we come around. You know, the Tibetans celebrate these 4 great wheel turning days throughout the year. One of them is when the Buddha went to Shita heaven to teach his mother. His mother died, shortly after his birth. He was raised by a maternal aunt. And years later, when he came to his enlightenment and he was teaching around, and his father was not happy. They heard he had disappeared. And he went on this 6-year kind of quest. No one knew where he was. And then he reappeared as this fully enlightened person teaching, and his fame was spreading. And his father heard that his son was now this great spiritual teacher, and that one of his disciplines was begging food every day. And the father was outraged. You can't have. He was a member of the royalty, the warrior class. I mean, you just can't be doing that. And at one point, the Buddha came back to Kapilavastu, his hometown, and met his father and family and all of that. The father tried to dissuade him from his spiritual path, but of course, he wouldn't do that. And he kept trying. He would send like some of his close relatives, like cousins and that, go see the Buddha and tell him to come back here and like that. And they would go, and the Buddha would ordain these people because they obviously had a very powerful connection with the Buddha. So there are all sorts of wonderful, wonderful, wonderful stories like that, but much drama and much teaching. And we don't, the Tibetans don't read the Pali Sutras so much. But when you do read them, they're so human. It's like you can sort of smell the dust of India in them because they're on this very human level. The Buddha came into this town. There were so many people. They, gave him like a feast that they had. People were there. They asked this question. This guy who wasn't a Buddhist asked the question. The debates that happened. So there are many wonderful examples and teachings in those stories. But basically, this story that we just went through. Okay, so he starts with that 12 principal deeds of the Buddha, and then next time we'll start with the 4 noble truths, and now we start getting into the layout of the teachings. Then the fully endowed human body, awareness of death, the 3 lower realms of existence, renunciation, taking refuge, qualities of the Buddha, karma, law of cause and effect, then virtuous karma, the 3 scopes, how great basically is your aspiration and effect on others, the 6 perfections, the paramitas, vipassana, true seeing, then the 5 paths of self-liberation, then the 5 paths of Mahayana, then the 10 bhumis, the 10 bodhisattva bhumis levels, then the 4 Buddhakayas, the 4 bodies of the Buddha, finally Buddhahood. And there's a text in the back for puja. Okay, any questions? Any reactions? Anything? Take the mic. Yeah, no, right. All of this, the Dharma all comes out of the natural state. In fact, we're never apart from the natural state. So, for instance, we'll get into this later, but Nagarjuna, this great bodhisattva in early India, I think the 2nd century, somewhere like that, maybe third. At any rate, this teaching of the two truths, the relative conventional truths and the absolute truths. But the greatness of the Dharma is that they're not two different things. It depends on your own limitation. So from a dualistic perspective, this absolute truth appears as the conventional truth. Conventional truth is all the like the 10 virtues, the 10 non-virtues. They're said to be jnana, the Sanskrit word, which means like primal knowing without, just by the nature itself. Jnana, I think it is, jnana. But the conventional truth, the relative truth, is vijnana. And V just means by the limits. So it's experiencing the ultimate truth, but by the limits, because we find ourselves, like it says, he said here, good and bad, right and wrong, left, right. We have all these limits. That's just how we experience the world. In our own scientific way, kind of makes sense. I mean, you can see from evolution that, the force of evolution is one of just fitness. Fitness means survivability. What is it in this limited world that helps you just pass your genes on to someone else? But obviously that's a limited approach. It's not a complete understanding of everything, but in this very kind of limited way, and nothing wrong with that. But when we attach and we think that's the entire thing. So the Dharma, it's just amazing what these people worked out so long ago. From their meditations and realizations, of course, the experience of jnana, this primal wisdom, primal reality, you might say. But even to label it as reality is to limit it as wrong. So even when we talk about two truths, when you're talking about absolute truth, that's a relative concept. So, but the important thing is that these teachings give you confidence. So you'll kind of plunge in, so to speak. But at any rate, vijnana, we have to learn by the limits. We have to act by the limits. And although it's true, the ultimate level, Buddha can do all sorts of things that appear to be even non-virtuous, but isn't. But for us, we have to go by the vijnana, and that is our true nature manifesting perfectly right here, right now. We don't have to even search for it. Yeah, jnana. Yeah. Well, the God realm labels stuff too, but they just they just lack some of the hassles that we have. Just fun and joy. It's like the kids playing, and at nighttime. Okay, time to. At least when I was kids, people played outside. I don't know if they do that anymore, but it was like your mother calling you in. I don't want to come in. I don't want this fun to end. I remember playing some game as a kid. We had some, a park that had a pond and a swamp, and it wasn't really a park. They called it a park, but it was just left over where they didn't develop the suburb. And we would go there, and the kids, have so much fun, like playing army or something, with sticks and all of this. Yes, you had such a great time, and then your mom would call you in for that night, and you'd say, "We're going to go back there tomorrow and do it again." Never the same. It always lacked the spontaneity. It was never the same. We'd try, but it was just kind of like wooden and manufactured, or as they say, fabricated. So our true nature is not fabricated. And yet, from our meditation, from this practice of looking within to see, looking at your mind and seeing the arisings of the mind, you see your fabrications. We're trying to find a refuge in some fabricated mental state that we create, whether it's like owning the world or having all the power in the world or all the attractiveness of the world or whatever it is, we're trying to fabricate that. And of course, it's going in the wrong direction. And nothing wrong with any of those things, but it's the understanding, you know. So the unfabricated nature. And yet we're in this paradoxical state where vijnana, we have to learn by the limits. So we have to learn these things and then apply them. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that one becomes a great scholar or something, because the nature itself is unfabricated. So it's never away from us. And one's own natural development can just open up. Whatever it is, all these things are to, one, encourage you in faith, and that can be very helpful. You see a big book written about something, must be something there. You have a little more faith than just some guy just making it up. So there's that. But the other thing is that these are all methods, because the path is compassion. Therefore, these are all methods by which we can communicate to others. And that's so helpful, because there's so many people with really good, good aspiration and that. And in one sense, that's enough. But in another sense, people come up with all sorts of dilemmas and questions and problems in their life. And the Dharma's there like this, this medicine cabinet that is very helpful, because even, someone who has a long way to go on the path, they can still rely on the teachings of the Dharma, and that becomes a method for themselves. And then they can say the right words, but get the wrong effect, because their attitude is there. They're trying to build their ego by clinging to Dharma. I mean, again, it's this self-correcting process that goes on and on and on. But the Dharma provides the tools, something, some concept that you can use to get beyond concepts. Yeah, vijnana. Okay, anything else? Yeah.
Speaking of paradox in the Buddhist story, the balancing act between these two sides of the paradox of like self and no self, being fully enlightened being, yet still being in the world and teaching. Can you explain that? Like, obviously, he knows the ultimate truth
Yes.
of no self, yet hearing the famous teacher, he has to be a self.
Yes. Yes.
But ultimate understanding knows
Yeah. The there are two ways of looking at the Buddha. One is this person that lived through the 3 world eons, practicing bodhicitta continuously, and then came to birth in this last birth in Bodh Gaya, or in Kapilavastu, but then in Lumbini, sorry, and then raised in Kapilavastu, came to enlightenment in Bodh Gaya. So all this karma, all this virtue, positive karma, this accumulation of merit, 3 kalpas, ripening like that. And then there's the view of the Buddha that the Buddha was always enlightened. All of that stuff was a display for us. So the Nirmanakaya, again, bodies of the Buddha, the mind you can think of as just completely vast, the Dharmakaya, body of truth. The speech aspect, the very powerful kind of subtle and like cosmic communication. So if you think about like, speech, the power that I can reach you across the room, even though we don't even see each other. There's no body, but there's this speech. We're able to communicate. So on that level, the Sambhogakaya, the body of bliss, exists in that way simultaneously. But then the Nirmanakaya is called the deceptive body, because it looks like, in this case, an old man sitting under a tree in ancient India. But people couldn't see, but some people who were fortunate, could see a Buddha. But still, the whole display is there of life and death and suffering, everything happening. So it is a paradox, just like you said. There isn't any way of really kind of squaring the circle, squaring the square, circling the square. I don't know what we do. uh, because it's non-conceptual and it's beyond our rational understanding, but it's not violative of a rational understanding. And this rational mind is a tremendous servant helping us get beyond the rational mind. Yeah. Yeah. And of course, the teaching is that you can't tell, you can't tell from outer appearance who's what's a bodhisattva and what isn't. Can be the person taking a very unconventional appearance, can be a king, it can be a servant. You just don't know. Yeah. So in our own lives, we start to see the fabrication in our mind and our clinging to the thoughts that are arising. But at the same time, we're recognizing how they disappear when we don't cling to them. And then clearly there's something else, something deeper, you might say, something more real. Not that they're not real, but again, everything starts to take on a dreamlike quality. Garam Pache has said, the whole practice to Buddhahood is the practice of wisdom and compassion. And the practice of wisdom is seeing all of this as being dreamlike. If we're doing that all the time, it immediately helps because someone chews you out, it's dreamlike. The compassion is just the attitude that all beings have been your mother. And then suddenly you're just looking at people with a mind of love, relationship, importance, gratitude, all these natural qualities that one has with a mother. And that's how we're going around. So, and he makes it sound so simple. All these teachings just boil down to dreamlike existence. All beings have been your mother. Okay. Okay. All right. We can dedicate tonight if I could find a little dedication. I don't know that we have it. Transfer of merit. That's the end of the smaller sutra, the smaller Pure Land Sutra. So this is Shakyamuni Buddha, Shariputra. Just as I now praise the inconceivable virtue of other Buddhas, they also praise my inconceivable virtue, saying, Shakyamuni Buddha, you have accomplished an extremely difficult and unprecedented task. In this Saha world, Saha means the world of patient endurance. In this Saha world, during the evil period of the 5 defilements, those of the defilement of time, life is shortened, the defilement of views, the defilement of passions, the defilement of sentient beings, and the defilement of lifespan. Yeah, time, lifespan, I'm not sure the difference there. You have attained highest perfect enlightenment, and for the sake of sentient beings have delivered this teaching, which is the most difficult in the world to accept in faith. Shariputra, you must realize that I have accomplished this difficult task during the period of the 5 defilements. That is to say, having attained highest perfect enlightenment, I have, for the sake of the world, delivered this teaching, which is so hard for people to accept in faith. This is an extremely difficult task. But when the Buddha had delivered this sutra, Shariputra and all the monks, together with beings of the whole world, including devas, humans, asuras, rejoiced at what they had heard and reverently accepted it. Having worshipped him, they departed. One more thought on your question, Steffi. Yeah, Garampache says that for a tulku, like a bodhisattva, to Nirmanakaya, to take birth, you enter into this suffering world. And in a sense, you can say you're stained by it. Because instead of teaching like the Pure Land, where everything is conducive to Dharma, and even the birds are singing Dharma, just everything is just, you don't have to work at it. It's just naturally occurring. This heightened awareness and heightened progress. We are in this world of the defilements where a lot of obstacles. Yeah. We dedicate the merit from this evening to all motherly sentient beings. May each and every one of them come to realize their true nature. Teach sentient beings for as long as it takes until every single one is free. And may we never, never, never give up this refuge. Swaha. Okay. All right. Onward and upward. Yeah.